Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PLAYERSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And if you've already done that for us, you're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How you doing, Lewis?
I'm doing alright, Mark, again, not too bad. Ready for Christmas and the Christmas break and all things to stop for a little while, to be honest, but not too bad.
Very good. I also know for a fact that Lewis is lying to you and he's been ill and is hungover today. How are you doing? Do you care to answer that again?
I mean, I'm neither of those things now. I was I was on my work night out last night, so today's been a bit rough, but also, yeah, I got absolutely floored by like the return of that cold that I had a few weeks back. I've been fine for like a month, and then suddenly at the weekend I was absolutely battered and kind of stayed glued to the couch and not really able to do very much for a few days. And my partner actually is still really bad, so it's been a sick household these last few days, but I'm on the mend at least, although you can probably still hear it a wee bit in my voice. But because of that, Mark, I have basically not been playing any video games this week because I couldn't face starting anything when I wasn't feeling good at the weekend. And if I still had anything that wasn't too challenging to do in God of War, I might have just gone around mopping up. But most of the stuff I've got left is, fairly challenging fights generally. So yeah, I couldn't face trying to get invested in something new, and then the weeks just passed me by. So nothing new to report here. That's kind of why I'm saying I'm ready for the break, because I want to start playing some stuff.
Fair enough, man. No, I definitely get that. I think that playing video games is seen as like a lazy endeavour or whatever, right? But actually it takes much more mental fortitude to be sitting playing a video game than it is to be lying on the couch watching TV. So I very much get that. When I'm ill as well, I cannot play video games. I just can't. So very much get you, man. Very much get you. Glad you're feeling better though.
Thanks. And what have you been playing?
Yes, I have to take this whole section myself now. I played and completed Bayonetta 3 now. I did mention last week that I'd started it, but I have now finished the game. It's not a very long game, to be honest. Look, it is a ton of fun, as are all the Bayonetta games. They're just very, very, very fun to play. But if I'm being completely honest with myself, it is probably the worst Bayonetta, which is slightly disappointing. But maybe not for the same reasons that I've seen a lot of other criticism about the game. There seemed to be a lot of criticism about the story. But honestly, see if you're playing Bayonetta for the story, you are a fucking maniac. I don't know what you're doing. The story in all of these games is tenuous at best. There is just enough there to keep a consistent thread through playing the game, but that is about it. What makes these games fun is the combat. The combat is everything, do you know what I mean? And the combat, when you play as Bayonetta, is fucking great. And 2/3 of the game is playing as Bayonetta and doing all the usual Bayonetta stuff, and all that is awesome, right? The problem arrives is when they make you go the other characters. So there's a character called John who you play in a sort of 2D stealth game. It almost has the feel of a Katana Zero about it, but it's supposedly stealth based, but it's not really stealth based either. And then there's another character that you play as called Viola, who is not good, in my opinion, I would say to go. Because the thing about Bayonetta, and the thing that for me about Bayonetta that is really, really fun, is that it is this arcadey combat, but it's frenetic. There's just non-stop action all of the time. And a lot of that has to do with the dodging system, I would say. So when you do a close dodge, like a lot of other games, time slows down and whatever. There was a similar thing in God of War. This is not a new mechanic, I'm not trying to say that, but it just works really well. It's just implemented really well in these games, I think. With Viola, they changed that to a parry system where to get your witch time, which is time slowing down, you have to parry your opponent, which means that you're always waiting for your opponent to attack then parry them. So it's a totally different rhythm. And for me, it just brought the game to a screeching halt. Same with the genre sections as well. every time I wasn't playing as Bayonetta, I was just like, I really wish I was playing as Bayonetta right now. Do you know what I mean? Which is, for me, are a bit disappointing, to be honest.
Is that those sections are bad, though, or is it just that the Bayonetta ones are so much better, or is that a bit of both, maybe?
Probably a bit of both, to be honest with you. I don't think that they were particularly good. I mean, I think that the Viola sections are basically fine. I just didn't really... I mean, the character in and of themselves, like, the character as in the function that she serves in part of the story, I also sort of fucking hate, to be honest. But like in terms of how she plays, like she plays fine. It's just not what I want from this game. It just feels slower and less fun. Frankly, it's less fucking fun. That's really what it comes down to. The genre sections, in my opinion, were basically quite bad, to be honest. And the way that this video game ends, and I am about to spoil the entirety of Bayonetta 3 and where this entire game goes, so if you don't want to hear that, maybe skip ahead a little bit here, but basically, the introduction of Viola, like, she turns out to be Bayonetta's daughter, and at the end of this game, Bayonetta, so far as we can tell, dies, and the Bayonetta name is then passed on to Viola, and then she's supposed to be the new Bayonetta, which for me is not something I want for this series very much at all. So that was a bit of like a bummer ending as well. Do you know what I mean? I don't know, like compared to the first two games, I just did not enjoy this anywhere near as much as they did. As well, I have to say that coming from the PS5, playing a lot of PS5 recently, and before that playing a lot of Series X, coming back to the Switch, oh boy, they need an upgrade soon. They really do. I feel as if the last couple of games that I've played on Switch are like creaking at the edges now, this console, but that's maybe a story for a different day. But yeah, sadly, just didn't vibe with me quite as well. Like, to be honest with you, if you played the other Bayonetta games and you enjoyed those Bayonetta games, this is good. Like, you should definitely go and play it. It's worth your time playing. It's just not as good as they were, you know?
Yeah, that's a shame. I mean, there's been a lot of hype around this one, and it did, review well, but then, like you say, review divisively as well. I suppose, yeah, people just have different investments in that series, but I kind of assumed that people were playing it for the reasons that you play it, if you know what I mean, by and large, that it's the action and the combat. I mean,
it really should be. If they're not, they should be.
It sounds to me like it still nails it on that part. It's just that they've kind of added a bunch of stuff. I mean, I don't even know, do you play as other characters in the other Bayonetta games, or is that a new addition as well?
No, that's a new addition, so you don't play as other characters in other Bayonetta games, at least not that I can remember, and certainly not for as long
not substantially
pieces of time as they do in this game. And there's another whole like sort of kaiju fighting system in this game, which was in the other games was like your finishing move, but in this one is a bit more dynamic, and you can sort of summon them all the time now, which also I'm not a huge fan of, because again it just takes away from the good combat. Like, focus on the good combat bits, and anytime you're not doing the good combat bits, it's like, well, why not? Why am I not doing the good combat bits? You know what I mean? That's where this game excels, and you're just putting a lot of hurdles in the way of that a lot of time, it feels like. But yeah, I don't know, it just didn't vibe with me as much as the previous two games. Again, if you enjoyed those first two games, you should definitely give this a go as well. It is a good game, it's just not as good as they were. But Lewis, it is now time for Not the News, because we are going to recap the year of 2022 in gaming. Alright, Lewis, as this is going to be our last podcast of the year, we're taking a little break and then we'll be back strong in the new year. We decided that we were going to sort of take a look back at the year that we've had in video games. And Lewis, I think that we have to kick things off with the headline that has dominated all year, and that is the Activision deal. It has come back again and again, week in and week out. Feels like we cannot get away from this deal, Lewis. I think we both started the year thinking, all these regulators, they're just doing their due diligence. The deal will go through basically unchallenged. And that is how things started with Brazil, who did pass this deal through their regulators basically unchanged. But what we did learn, we did get a little peek behind the curtain about how Sony specifically was objecting to this deal in no uncertain terms. And it turns out that they were objecting a lot, and basically around Call of Duty, and really only around Call of Duty. That was their main thing. Then, subsequently, the UK regulators, the CMA, announced that they were doing a Phase 2 investigation into the deal, which is basically just a more in-depth investigation around PlayStation's complaints and anti-competition concerns. The EU then announced their regulators were doing basically the same thing as the UK regulators once. And now, Lewis, just in the past week or so, and we've not really had a chance to talk about this for various reasons, but the biggest bombshell of this is that the US regulators, the FTC, are suing Microsoft over the Activision deal, which I never thought would happen in a million years. Honestly, I thought the FTC would just wave this through, to be honest with you. Just doing a good capitalism there, Microsoft, well done. You know what I mean? I wasn't expecting this in the slightest. So far as what I've been able to work out, I think that the term suing is maybe the wrong word to use here, but basically this is going to court in some capacity, and Microsoft are prepared for a court battle. It remains to be seen how strong this challenge really is from the FTC. I know that it's been a big point of emphasis from Joe Biden's government that he wants to sort of tackle big tech mergers and stuff like that and stop consolidation in that side of the business. So I don't know if that's related to this. I have also seen that this could push things back to 2024. So we could be talking about this deal for the vast majority of 2023 as well. This story just seems to keep on growing and growing and growing. There's more twists and turns. Lewis, what are your thoughts on this? It has dominated our year, I feel.
Yeah, it really has. I mean, we've talked about it umpteen times, and we've said as well how, we thought things like the Bethesda deal, that felt like big news and dominating news at the time, and this has just absolutely dwarfed it in terms of its kind of longevity and these crazy twists and turns and the dramatic additions of like Sony's testimony and their kind of begging letters at times to some of these regulators.
Absolutely.
I think this latest turn, the FTC suing them, is quite remarkable. Yeah, as you say, like it feels like bombshell news. And it's probably Microsoft's nightmare scenario in a lot of ways, because obviously they wanted all of this to sail through. I'm sure they would have been prepared for a bit of friction here and there, but I don't imagine they would have seen themselves going to court in the States over this and having to defend this deal and argue that it's not. I mean, what we've seen repeatedly from them and their kind of counterpoints to Sony's arguments is this quite strange, surreal downplaying of the value of what they're trying to buy for $70 billion and a downplaying of their own role within the industry. And now they're going to have to go and do that again in court in front of a jury, potentially with reporters there picking it all up. I mean, it's not an ideal situation for Sony either, really, because all of this dirty laundry keeps coming out from both sides, and these pretty aggressive or passive-aggressive counterpoints to one another from the chief execs and these various business people and lawyers and stuff. So it would be better for all sides if this was handled behind closed doors, but it doesn't seem like they're going to get that opportunity now, and it is going to kind of go the distance in court. And yeah, that will almost certainly cause delays. Xbox have already had to give concessions around, or offer concessions at least around like 10 years of license for Call of Duty on PlayStation. They've kind of done the same with Nintendo, even I think as a way of showing regulators how open to this that they are. But they're not going to want to keep doing that forever. And what are they going to have to concede when they go to court over this and to get it past this, massive speed bump essentially that the FTC presents?
Well, something that we've talked about before, talking about things like how Google had to sell off Giphy and things like that, had to sell off parts of their business because it was too dominant or whatever within that sector. You know what I mean? That's what I think could happen here, is that the FTC or some other regulator might say to Microsoft, you can do this deal if you want, but Call of Duty has to operate independently, do you know what I mean? And you will just get the Call of Duty studio or whatever, and then they will just make Call of Duty and it will just be independent from all of this and it will be on all platforms forever. That would be a pretty bad thing, I think, for Xbox, because they were banking on that, do you know what I mean? Despite what they claim about mobile, and I know that mobile will be a big part of this as well, because they do have a small presence on mobile and King have an enormous presence on mobile, so that will be a big part of this as well, and I think that they would do the deal just for that as well. But the Call of Duty thing is going to be a huge hammer blow if it does end up being that they have to concede in some way that it will have to be multi-platform indefinitely, basically. Do you know what I mean? I started out this by saying we both thought that it was basically going to go through unhindered and there wouldn't be any issues. We're now a year later, and with the input of several regulatory bodies, like, what do you feel is the most likely outcome now?
I mean, it's really hard to say. It was hard to say even at the beginning, but it just felt like it would all go through because that's sort of how things have been with consolidation in this industry for a long time. And I guess that's another major story that kind of is the bottom of the iceberg on this one in particular, is just that it's part of this much wider trend of industry consolidation. In terms of what I think is going to happen here, to be totally honest, I still think it will probably end up that Xbox is publishing Call of Duty as expected, and there may be some longer term deals for the other platform holders. I like the idea of Call of Duty kind of being hived off, but I just can't really. I keep worrying about the mechanics of that. Like, surely the deal isn't the same deal anymore if they're not getting Call of Duty, you know what I mean, and they're not getting that exclusivity on it. Is that company worth $70 billion without Call of Duty?
Probably not, but they would have to sell it off, so they would also be selling it off for X amount of money, do you know what I mean? Probably quite a huge amount of money, to be honest with you, to then recoup some of that. But I suppose that would be an opportunity for them to pull out of the deal if they didn't want it without Call of Duty, knowing that they would then have to sell Call of Duty if they went on with the deal, you know?
Yeah. I mean, would they be open to just saying, actually, we'll give you 10 billion and we'll just take King because that's the bit we're interested in, and we'll leave, you know? It just
No, because I don't think Activision's board's going to do that. They're going to go, no, you're all right, big man. Yeah. No, we'll keep the really profitable mobile stuff, thanks.
But yeah, that's the thing. There's so many potential kind of permutations of all of this, and you just never know which way it might go, and ultimately what Sony might kind of agree to enable it to happen. You know, if they can get a 20-year license, maybe they would take that and shake hands and say, well, good luck to you, kind of thing. But we'll see. I like you say, we're going to be talking about this almost every week all of next year.
Oh God, I hope it's not that intense next year. I hope that everything just goes quiet while all these regulators work their shit out, basically.
Yeah. The next thing that I want to talk about, and we've kind of been hinting about it, particularly last week when we were doing our Game Awards coverage, is what our Game of the Year is. Now, normally, Mark, we would do a big discussion on what our Game of the Year is, share our kind of lists of what we've been playing, debate the merits of several of them, and maybe come to a decision. But we have said repeatedly for months and months and months that this year has essentially come down to two games in the industry and for us particularly, and that obviously is Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok, two games that are just absolutely towering achievements for me in their own quite different ways, really.
Sure. Yeah,
and just, you know, we could talk about these two games and have done at length over the months, but there's so much to pull out of each of them, so we don't necessarily have time to dive into what we love and dislike about each individually. But you have said already, Mark, last week, quite confidently, I thought, quite decisively, that God of War Ragnarok is your favourite game of the year. Even, you know, it was the most nominated game at the Game Awards. It won the most awards, even though it didn't quite take the biggest prizes. So, you know, obviously a lot of people kind of agree on how broadly successful it is. But you were like definite about it, which I was a wee bit surprised by. So do you want to tell us why that is?
Well, to be honest with you, it is more of my sort of game. Do you know what I mean? I do, despite all the things I just said about Bayonetta, I do usually value narrative very heavily in a story. And I think that this just has it in spades. Yes, Miyazaki has his own quite incredible way of storytelling in his games, and I think that is fantastic. And I know there was a bit of a sort of Twitter storm about, oh, it doesn't even have a narrative or whatever. That is all absolute bullshit. I think that what Elden Ring does with its story is very interesting and is sort of only really doable in a video game platform, which is pretty cool as well. But I don't know, I just always gravitate towards the more cinematic stuff, which God of War has in spades. And beyond that, I think that the combat's just great. It's just so fucking satisfying to play. It really is just so enjoyable to play. Cutting over Elden Ring again, Elden Ring is an absolute slog to play at times, do you know what I mean? Like, very, very rewarding, obviously, and intentionally difficult, intentionally designed that way. I'm not really saying that as a negative, but it's very different game experiences is what I'm sort of coming down to. I think Elden Ring is an astonishing game in a lot of ways as well. I've said on here before, like, I didn't enjoy it maybe as much as I thought that I was going to. When I first started playing the game, I thought, oh my God, this is one of the greatest things that's ever happened in video games. This is absolutely astonishing. And the more and more I played it, the less and less I felt like that. Do you know what I mean? I thought that it got long in the tooth quite a long time before it ended for me. Like, I played the game for, I think it was 120 hours or something like that. I played it for a long, long time. Like, no one can say I didn't put in the fucking hours, right? For me, God of War just vibes me much more. It's much more my kind of game. Like, that is my game of the year, and I do stand by that. However, if someone were to turn around and say, well, Elden Ring's much more my sort of game and it's my game of the year for all the reasons that I just laid out, and they preferred it for X, Y, and Z reason, I'd be like, yeah, cool, man. That's like totally get it. It's totally bit like I completely see both sides of this coin. You know what I mean? Just for me, it's God of War. But if yours is Elden Ring, if yours is anything, fair enough to you. But if yours is Elden Ring specifically, fair enough. I can't really fault that at all. Do you know what I mean? It was like when Elden Ring won Game of the Year, I was like, yep, no one can say that didn't deserve that. You know what I mean? But similarly, turning it around to God of War, I think I'd be saying exactly the same thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thoughts kind of echo a lot of that in a sense. It felt like a really hard decision, this, to me, what's the better of the two, or which one I liked the most. Because I guess, yeah, I probably, well, not even probably, I definitely enjoyed the moment-to-moment of God of War a lot more. You know, it is a much easier game to just get involved in, to sit with for a few hours. As we were saying at the top of the show, like, sometimes you just didn't actually have the, as you put it, the mental fortitude to want to fire up Elden Ring. You know what I mean? If it's too late at night.
You had to like psych yourself up to play it sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes you just
were
like,
coming up against a difficult boss.
I've only got an hour to play, and I know that if I, make progress but don't find the next site of grace, I've kind of not gained anything, or I might die several times and that'll be my entire play session. Things like that will always kind of be difficult for me with FromSoft games, I think, but just because of the way my gaming time is. But at the same time, like, God of War, despite being absolutely incredible and jaw-dropping in places, and the cinematic side, the narrative and all that was phenomenal, it never once really had a moment that I found as exhilarating or as surprising as some of what we experienced in Elden Ring. I think that I kind of phrased it a few weeks ago as being the difference between evolution on the side of God of War Ragnarok. It evolves on what the last game was doing and kind of just makes that story a bit bigger. But
almost to a fault, I would say.
I would say almost to a fault, and almost didn't find any major moment that even stands up really against the 2018 game. Like, I think all the big shocks and surprises and big boss encounters and stuff were all kind of not necessarily better, but all more kind of impressive and exciting in the 2018 game. Whereas Elden Ring, I mean, this is what FromSoft does. I find the whole game are moments that you want to text your pal about. You know what I mean? The whole thing is like, God, did you, as I said before, like the first time you go down underground in one of those big elevators and you see that impossible purple sky, the first time you walk out in Liurnia and see the vast distance in front of you and think, how the fuck is that still, like, how have I got this much still to go? And you're in the first act really at that point, even still, like, all of that stuff. Some of the boss encounters, not all of them, some of them weren't great. Some of the one big flaw that Elden Ring has to me, other than its length, which you were kind of mentioning, is just that because it is so big in scale, it is more repetitive than a game like Bloodborne was. There's just more of doing this, literally the same boss, but just in a slightly different configuration or whatever.
I think a lot of the boss battles as well in Elden Ring, and I think I said this at the time as well, like, their moveset, a lot of them seem to be flail about in your general direction, to the point that you had to sort of go miles away from them. Like, you had to really dodge away from them, or I felt as if you did as well. Like, I'm sure people who are savants at the fucking game can beat most of them in like seconds, but like, for a normal plebeian gamer here, like, I felt as though I was either always far too far away, then when I was running in and getting close, their attack was just like flail at me. I don't know, I just didn't enjoy comparing it to Bloodborne, where all the bosses just felt amazing, like absolutely amazing and so unique and so different to play against. I never really felt that way in Elden Ring. Like, I would actually argue that the bosses in Elden Ring were a bit of a letdown from what I was hoping for. But again, like, see, this is the thing, is that I think that you could easily go back and forward on this all day, and someone's head just exploded that I said that. Do you know what I mean?
Again, I think that's the thing about Elden Ring, though, is that I think actually if you took the number of bosses that are in Bloodborne, which for talking sake say is like 15, it's probably more than that, but you could find 15 phenomenal bosses in Elden Ring. I think it's when you're at a point where you're going like, this is boss fight 70, and that's that's when you're kind of going, oh, actually some of this is repetitive and not quite as strong. But to me, like, like that sense of scale and discoverability and kind of wonder, and that's not even to touch on the lore and the depth of that story and that world that's been created. I think I'm probably edging slightly closer to giving it to Elden Ring. And I say that even though I would recommend God of War to more people and more easily than I would recommend Elden Ring.
Oh, fucking definitely.
Yeah. And I would probably be more likely to go back to God of War to tidy up than I would to go back to playing Elden Ring.
Yeah, I've sort of settled on the fact that I will probably never play Elden Ring again.
Yeah,
you know that would probably be my one and only playthrough of Elden Ring. I would much rather go back and play Bloodborne 3 times than play Elden Ring again.
I mean, I would probably agree with that as well. But I think Bloodborne is very possibly the best game ever made. So, but the thing with Elden Ring, if they brought out DLC, I would. I don't know, they just have, but I mean, proper story DLC. I would definitely go back to that. And so anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying, I think to me it's basically like, if it was a vote split, it would be like 51-49 to Elden Ring, and that's sort of, pretty definitely much as equal as it can be.
Yeah, and on recommending stuff as well, like, see if you have a PS5 or a PS4 still, because it came out in PS4 as well, I'm sort of forgetting. Do yourself a favour and go and play God of War. It is an astonishing video game. Like, it is so much more accessible than Elden Ring is as well. Like, I can see so many people getting to a certain point of Elden Ring and just totally bouncing off it and just being like, nah, not for me. But I can't imagine that most people wouldn't find something to enjoy in God of War.
Exactly, yeah. All right, and so from the 2 Game of the Year contenders that we've been discussing, let's widen this out a bit and just talk about 2022 generally. Like, what was this year in games? To me, a couple of things came up when I first started thinking about this, which is that it has felt like a bit of a quiet year, maybe a slightly disappointing year. But
I mean, I get this narrative, right, and everyone says this, right, but at the same time, arguably, God of War and Elden Ring, 2 of the best games potentially ever made, came out this year, which is weird to talk about it being a quiet year,
Well, that's, I guess the actual title that I had kind of given to this section when we were planning this out was like Feast and Famine. Like, that has been what the year has felt like to me. There's been a couple of moments, particularly at the start of the year and at the very end of the year, when there have been several and some major releases and really exciting games, and particularly in the case of those 2, and that's not even to mention things like Horizon, another major game that came out this year and just hasn't had the airtime that others have. But in between times, it felt like a bit of a dearth through the spring and the summer, and that's not to say entirely, and obviously anyone listening to this will be like, what about blah blah blah, this game that I love? And of course there were loads of good games, and actually, see, when I started looking back over our list, there was way more, I think, in that period than I really was than it feels like the narrative allows for,
Sure,
and I guess that's kind of my first question really, is like, how has that narrative come about? Is it because we've got these 2 totem games at the top that is maybe casting a long shadow over everything else, or do you think it just has genuinely not been a sort of great year a great cadence of releases this year?
Well, I think that is true for a kickoff. I do think it's not a great cadence of releases, but when I say that, what I mean, and what most people mean when they say, oh, it's been a quiet year, what they mean is it's been a quiet year for major AAA releases, and that is what we had a sort of dearth of, or what it feels like we had a sort of dearth of in the summer. Like, I played Triangle Strategy in the spring and in the summer, do you know what I mean? Which was a great game, and I really liked it if you were into that sort of thing. But it was more like, find your niche, find the game that is suited to you at this moment, do you know what I mean? Rather than this, as you said, like, totemic release that everyone's playing, the whole narrative's about that game, do you know what I mean? And then it's this narrative after this narrative after this narrative, and sometimes you get years like 2018, like famously a fantastic year in video games, where it's just absolutely banger after banger after banger, and everyone's all talking about the same thing all the time. But that didn't really happen this year. You had, well, for a little while in the beginning of the year, you had Horizon, but then quickly moving on to Elden Ring, which dominated for so long. Then there was a bit of a quiet period where everyone was playing smaller releases, and then it came to the latter half of the year where God of War obviously dominated, along with your Call of Duties and everything else that usually comes out in that space of time as well, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely that. I mean, I think the other thing, I think your point there actually about the way that those games usually draw in all the conversation, so if it becomes too fractured because there's not a huge game like that everyone's talking about, I think that partly explains what this year has felt like, because I think even it has been actually a really good year for indie releases, but there hasn't been one, even on that side, that has been
there's no like Celeste or Hollow Knight or like the indie of the year. Yeah,
like
I totally get
the one that
yeah,
everyone got around. And the closest to that, in some ways, and that was kind of reflected in the Game Awards, was Stray, which was, a fine game, but it's not I mean,
it was a fine game.
Not remotely on the level of a Celeste or a Hollow Knight, you know?
No, it also wasn't as indie a game as I want to be winning that award.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was much closer to double A than true indie in my mind anyway.
Well, absolutely, yeah. It had big publisher money behind it, a huge marketing deal with Sony. It was all over everything for weeks because of the PS Plus exclusivity and all that.
Yeah,
so,
cute little cat as well. It's easy to fucking market.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it was a surefire hit. But, you know, and there's like you mentioned Triangle Strategy. We had Tunic, we had Cult of the Lamb, Immortality. I mean, there's been loads of games this year that have caught attention but just have not necessarily captured all of the attention, I suppose. It's also been a year where there's a hell of a lot of delays again, and it might be that this year we properly felt the weight of the pandemic effect on the development cycle, because it's kind of everything's been pushed back a wee bit, and there's games that have been released now but that had been planned for earlier in the year, and there's been plenty of games pushed into 2023 and beyond. I couldn't even begin to list. There's so many. I think I saw on IGN that's already like well beyond what 2021 had, and that felt like a delay heavy year. And so I guess it's that we're still not out of the woods on that side of things either, you know, and 2023 looks to be a really stacked year, and we'll probably do quite a lot of chat on that, I imagine, in our next episodes. But you can totally imagine that this thing might happen again, and 2023 could empty the way that 2022 has.
Very possibly, yeah. But I think in terms of like delays from the coronavirus, I think that while we might be feeling the full weight of that now, we maybe have a bit more clarity on how it's going to unravel. I think that was perhaps the problem for a long period of time, is that we just didn't know. But whereas now, I think that we're probably in a position where we do know what's going to be happening. So, yeah, I don't think it's... I always find it bad to say that, oh, it's not been a great year, because I think that is actually a bit disrespectful to a lot of the games that came out this year that are, like, really great, but it's just not capturing the whole gaming community all at once. Like, I think that that's really what we mean, and like you put it right, like, when the community's, like, fractured, and we're all playing different things, obviously. No one stopped playing fucking video games. Do you know what I mean? Whether it's something from your backlog or it is a new, like, just smaller game. Like, it doesn't feel like a big year, but actually there's been loads of great stuff that's came out this year. Absolutely loads of it. Do you know what I mean? But as you said, it's just been bookended by these absolutely two totemic video games that are both absolutely incredible. Do you know what I mean? And do cast a shadow over everything else. Like, even like Horizon Forbidden West, like, was a great video game. Like, it was a really, really good video game, and it will not get any awards because it will be in all the same categories of God of War, and it will not get any. It was like Spider-Man in 2018, right? Spider-Man was a fucking amazing game, but it never got any awards because God of War was there, Red Dead was there. It was like, it was never going to win anything, you know? Yeah, it has been a good year. It's just not been full of big AAA releases. That's what I would say. And that sort of brings me on to the next thing that I want to talk about, Lewis, which is Microsoft's bad year. Microsoft's bad 2022. And I think that maybe the reason why we didn't have so many big AAA releases is because Microsoft didn't release any. Do you know what I mean? Like, they released, talking about Xbox Game Studio games here, right? They released As Dusk Falls in July, which was an indie game. They technically released Grounded in September, but it's hard to call that a new game when it's been in early access for over 2 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, we've known about that game, and millions of people have played that game before that time. And then they released Pentiment just there in November. Nothing AAA at all. And although Pentiment and Grounded seem to do quite well, it's not one of those big totemic releases, do you know what I mean, that feel absent from this year. And I think that this might be why. And even on the Bethesda side, the only new game that they released this year was Ghostwire Tokyo, which was a PlayStation exclusive, do you know what I mean? And didn't really land in a big way, do you know what I mean? They did also bring Deathloop over to Game Pass, fair enough, but that again was a time PlayStation exclusive from last year. It's not a new thing. It's not going to grab attention in that way. And then even, I don't know, like, I'm slightly concerned about Xbox's lineup of games that are coming out, because you see these graphics of all the stuff that Xbox has promised, right? And they've promised the world, like, they have all these, like, amazing games that are coming out, like Avowed and Everwild and Contraband and Fable and Perfect Dark and Hellblade 2 and Project Mara and The Outer Worlds. And then on the Bethesda side, you've got The Elder Scrolls 6, you've got it's Starfield before that, of course, you've got Redfall, you've got this Indiana Jones game that they're making. They've promised that a Wolfenstein's coming along at some point. They've promised that a Fallout 5's coming along at some point. But the only games that actually have release dates for next year are Redfall and Starfield on the Bethesda side, and Forza Motorsport and Minecraft Legends on the Xbox Studios side. And fair enough, like Starfield is going to be the one, right? That's going to be the one that they want to hit. They want that to hit big. They want that to be an enormous totem release for them on the year. And it really should. It should be that. You know what I mean? But even around that, it just doesn't feel as though there's a lot coming from Xbox right now. Like, a lot of that stuff that I just mentioned that we've known about for ages and ages and ages still feels far away to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing indicating to me that Avowed is round the corner. Do you know what I mean?
No.
There's not. I mean, from what we've heard about Perfect Dark, that's still a mile away. From what we've heard about Everwild, that's still a mile away. Not heard about Fable since the cinematic that we've seen that announced it. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's just so much that they've promised, and I don't know, like, I feel as if Sony's like the total opposite of this. Like, we only hear about the Sony exclusive games like maybe a year max before they're about to come out. Do you know what I mean? But like, Xbox just seem to dump all this stuff on us and then have us asking questions about it for years and years and years. And I don't know, I feel as though they're maybe losing a bit of goodwill with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they got trashed by Ryan McCaffrey at IGN, who's like the Xbox guy over there, after the Game Awards last week, because they didn't show anything. They didn't show a single thing. And, you know, I think Xbox kind of said after that they, you know, they'll be showing stuff really soon. But as you mentioned there, they do these huge dumps, I think usually because there's such a clamour for like, when are you going to give us something? What's coming? And so they did like that big Xbox showcase where they show a bit of everything, and everyone's like, oh, amazing. But most of those games are so far out that they can't really show them again for years, and so everything just still feels really slow and staggered. I mean, if you look back at the year that's just gone, they did nothing. I mean, to the point where Phil Spencer had to basically apologise, I think, at one point, or kind of acknowledge publicly that it hadn't.
Yeah, he basically said it wasn't good enough and they need to do better. Yeah.
And that's good that they know that. I mean, they glide by because of Game Pass. So, you know, you said there, even off air as well, about like, why aren't some more Xbox gamers kind of mad about this or challenging the company on this? And I think it is just because Game Pass keeps bringing stuff and so it feels enough like an exclusive to an extent, or like the benefit of an exclusive. I mean, even today I think they got announced that High on Life is like the most played Game Pass game of the year. It's
sure. Yeah, it was, yeah. It actually done really, really well.
Yeah, it's done brilliantly. So, you know, as much as you could say, well, Xbox hasn't released any games, a lot of Xbox players are going to be like, well, I just got High on Life. It doesn't matter who made it. You know what I mean? Like, they've just got access to it, quote unquote, for free. And so that's how they get away with it. But it's not been a good enough year. I think, you know, you mentioned some of the PlayStation games.
Well, yeah, just to say the PlayStation games, like God of War Ragnarok, Gran Turismo 7, Horizon Forbidden West, MLB The Show 22, The Last of Us Part 1, and the Uncharted Collection all came out this year.
Yep.
I mean, you can't really complain with that.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's a stellar wide lineup, you know?
And then they've got a bunch of, you know, timed exclusives that are on the platform as well, PS Plus exclusives that are not, again, the same, but, you know, it just adds to a package there. And then when you look at Nintendo, I mean, not just, you know, big AAA releases, but this year they released Pokemon Legends Arceus, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Switch Sports, Mario Strikers, Splatoon 3, Mario plus Rabbids, Bayonetta 3, I know that's not technically Nintendo exactly, but, and then Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. That is a huge calendar of releases, and nobody's really talking about Nintendo having had a massive year because there wasn't a Mario or a Zelda game. But you can compare both of those stacks against what Xbox has done, and it's just really not good enough. And no matter how good your services are, the main service is games. So, you know, that's got to come.
Yeah, exactly. That's sort of what it comes down to, I suppose. And when I was saying, like, we're Xbox gamers, and look, we are primarily PlayStation boys here, we're being very open about this, and it's very easy to fall down a fucking fanboy rabbit hole here, right? But that's not the last thing that I want to do. But in reality, I've got a Series X now, do you know what I mean? That I've not played a single Xbox game on, like a game made by Xbox Studios. Like, I've not played anything on it because they've not fucking released anything since I bought it. Do you know what I mean? It's been the Game Pass machine, and maybe Xbox are okay with that, but I think that they're doing their fans a disservice there. And if I mean, see, if this was flipped on its head and that was PlayStation, I would be annoyed that a year or 2 years into the new console launch, you don't have a catalogue ready to go in your second year. Do you know what I mean? And it's this dearth of new content. You know what I mean? And I just don't think that's really on. Don't get me wrong. All they need to do is slap a few 2023 dates on some of those other things. Like, if Avowed and Fable and Hellblade 2 all come out in 2023, then we're talking about one of the biggest years for Xbox ever. Do you know what I mean? So they can definitely turn the corner on this. Like, I'm not saying that they can't, but yeah, right now I just think that more people, like more proper Xbox fans, should be like, what the fuck, man? Like, come on. Like, we want more games, we want new stuff, and it's just been so long since they released anything big and AAA new. Like, I think it was Halo was the last major AAA release, because that would have been December last year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that is just too long. End of story. Just wanted to mention another couple of little things. We'll do these more like we do our shout-outs in the regular show list. But something else that happened, and that I at least took notice of, was Stadia announced that they were dying and were properly shutting down.
Forgot about Stadia's
and I'll
death.
also tie that into the fact that Xbox are officially rethinking their Keystone streaming stick or device for TVs. Which brings me sort of round to the fact that when we done one of our look-aheads to the year ahead, I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, which, by the way, will be our next podcast when we come back in the new year, I said that I think one of the big things that Xbox is going to do, specifically Xbox, because the infrastructure is just there for them, and it makes so much sense for them to really push this. I thought that there was going to be a big push into streaming games, specifically by Xbox, and I was wrong about that, because that did not come to pass, I don't think. Don't get me wrong, it feels as if they're chipping away at it, but there's no like big push, and I thought that Keystone was going to be that big push, and now to hear that they're rethinking it, I think that the streaming future, which I still think that we're sort of ultimately going to go towards eventually, is just a lot further away than I was thinking in my head. Like, I was thinking maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, but actually maybe we're talking about in the next 15 to 20, you know what I mean? And maybe that sort of time frame that we'll actually see proper push towards this as like the main way to play video games, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that leads me on to one actually quite nicely, because that's about the death of a service, and I want to talk about the birth of a new player, I suppose, within this realm, which is the release of the Steam Deck, Mark, which was a huge moment this year.
Man. Yeah.
So that, came out back in I think back in February or something, but we both got ours in the summer. And yeah, it's not changed gaming for me as such, but I can see how it would be having that impact on a lot of people. And partly that's just because of the games I've been playing this year have eaten up a lot of the time that I might have otherwise dedicated to my Steam Deck. But I've really enjoyed using it. I mean, Inscription is one of the best games I've played all this year, and I played that entirely on Steam Deck. Really love the form factor, love how, I mean, it's not always the easiest thing to use, but basically once you get a game playing, it's been perfect for me so far. I suspect you've put a bit more time into yours than I have across the year, and kind of seen what it can do. But yeah, a huge moment this year, right?
No, it was absolutely an enormous moment. And yeah, while I've probably put in a little bit more time than you, probably not as much as I would like, to be honest with you. I would like to be playing more stuff on the Steam Deck, but I played both the Portal games on Steam Deck. You know what I mean? That was the first time I'd ever played them. Absolutely zero problem whatsoever. And what it's done for me is made PC gaming more like console gaming, which is exactly what I want. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to be messing about with PC. I don't give a fuck about the settings. I just want the game to run correctly on the software that I have, and the Steam Deck seems to be, for the most part, doing that very, very well. And yeah, I think it is a great addition to anyone who has a console, to be completely honest with you. Don't get me wrong, I know it's expensive. It's prohibitively expensive to a lot of people, and there was a waiting list for forever, and I still think that there is, to be honest. But if you can get yourself one of these, I would recommend it. It is a really, really great piece of hardware, I would say. All right, Liz, and with that, a full recap of 2022. Don't think we can say that we missed a single thing there. No, obviously we were just doing the sort of big things for us in the year, but alas, we could not cover everything. But we will be back for our final topic of the week of the year, Liz. And we are back for Topic of the Week. The Topic of the Week this week is our belated play-along of Stories Untold, which is largely my fault, so apologies for that, but we are getting to it now. Very excited to talk about this game, Liz.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, so this is Stories Untold. This is the first game from Glasgow-based studio No Code. Very happy to be playing a game by a local team who have gone on to kind of bigger and better things from here. So we're jumping in at this first game. We're also playing Observation this month to cover at the start of January as well. So a wee No Code double hitter. This, for anyone who's not been playing along with us, I suppose, is an episodic horror game. It's an adventure puzzler with quite a lot of different elements going on, but by and large it's a text adventure game with some other slight first-person-y elements tacked on and a few other kind of puzzle-solving elements to it all. But effectively, you would recognise it most as a text adventure. Directed by John McKellen, who founded No Code and also worked on Alien Isolation. I think he was part of the art team on Alien Isolation, which I think you can kind of see some of that influence come through here in terms of that focus on like old tech. Essentially, that was a big thing in Alien Isolation, just make everything look like it came from the late 70s. And this is obviously very like 80s inspired. I actually read tonight that the title sequence and the logo and stuff were done by the same artist as does Stranger Things, and I think that
you can absolutely see that.
Yeah,
I was like,
it
that
feels
is so
almost like a parody, but
it does. But this came first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, just there's a bit of real credibility there. I mean, we're not playing this just because it's a Glasgow studio. Like, this is a studio of quality, and as we say, like, have gone on to make Observation, which did really well, and they're now working on a Silent Hill game.
Exactly. Yeah, man. This is more than just us wanting to play something by a local studio, as you said. Like, these are good guys who are making good games, hopefully, you know what I mean? So yeah, very excited to see what they're doing with Silent Hill, because I would argue that might be the most exciting thing, the new thing that was shown at that showcase that they had not that long ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, really excited for that.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. So this, it's split into 4 chapters, 4 episodes: the house abandoned, the lab conduct, the station process, and the last session. And well, we are spoiling it now if you've not been playing along. So those first 3 sections feel completely disconnected until the 4th section pulls everything together. And actually, the first time I played it, I mentioned on the show that I was into the 2nd episode, and I said, "Oh, it's all completely disconnected," not realising.
Yeah, and because you said that, I thought that as well. Yeah, I thought it was 4 completely separate stories, and for the first 3 of them, you feel like that, and it feels like a sort of, I don't even want to say like proof of concept, but it feels as though they're trying to like get a certain atmosphere out of what you're doing. Do you know what I mean? And I thought that it was just like, oh, this is just a stepping stone onto bigger things, but actually this is a pretty fantastic little game in its own right, I would say. Yeah,
well, tell us what your overall thoughts on it, Mark, because you said, I think a couple of weeks ago, that you were kind of surprised by how much you'd liked it, or that it was kind of better than you thought it was going to be, or something along those lines. And I just, at that point, I was quite curious to hear what your kind of takeaway from it all was.
Well, I have to say that, see, when I was playing through those first 3, I was sort of like, oh, okay, this is like you set in a creepy sort of atmosphere, do you know what I mean? Particularly the 3rd one, I thought it was like they were getting into more problem solving type things as well, with this creepy sort of atmosphere as well. I was like, all right, this is cool. They're doing something interesting here. I'm sort of vibing with it in a lot of ways. Like, I could see this being blown up into something sort of bigger, if this is a stepping stone onto what Observation was, or to what they were going to be doing with the Silent Hill thing. I'm like, right, okay, cool, this is great as like a baseline thing. Then you play the 4th one and it all comes together, do you know what I mean? And then, I don't know, at that point you suddenly realise, oh, this isn't just a proof of concept, this is like a game in its own right that they were trying to achieve something with. And actually, it was very cleverly done. I suppose that's what I noticed by the end, because I think if a game like gets you like that, like it does make you believe that these are completely different things, and it turns out not to be completely different things, then the game has succeeded in what it was trying to do to you. Do you know what I mean? I think that it was very well done, is basically what I would say. Yeah. I think it was very well written. I think that it inspired confidence in the studio going forward and what they've done with Observation and what they're hopefully going to do with Silent Hill.
Nice. I mean, I think, yeah, that's a really good takeaway to get from it. You know, that not only is it, it technically is, I suppose, a proof of concept for this studio in terms of what they can do, but that you're kind of excited about what's next because of it. You know, that's obviously one of the things that you would hope your debut game would do. For me, I agree. Like the cleverness of the twist, I suppose. I mean, literally even the way that's delivered, where you're getting that same title sequence that feels a bit Stranger Thingsy, and then it's like paused, and someone's like, "Oh, you can watch the rest of that later," and you realise that it's a thing that happens in all 4 sequences, really, that there's kind of always more going on than it first appears. You know, in terms of in the first episode, by the end of it, you are aware that the game that you're playing is also happening around you, and that there's someone else in the house that you are sat at the desk playing the game of, kind of thing. And it kept doing that. So each individual episode, particularly when you think that they're unrelated, still has sort of intrigue around it, and enough to kind of make you go, what's really happening here, but in a really contained way. And then the 4th one, it literally pulls it all together in that you kind of replay the other 3 in a sense, in kind of micro form within that 4th episode, but it then gives you the punch of like, this is what's really been going on all along. What I thought was most clever about it is that they had resisted the temptation throughout to seed that. There was no signs really at other parts of the game that this was one connected story, really.
No, but often when games or other media do things like that, and they do resist the temptation to like foreshadow or like seed ideas like that, it feels clumsily done by then.
Exactly,
it feels as though like, oh well, we were shoehorning that in, or that's why that was weird, or whatever.
Yeah,
you know
or
what
it's
I mean?
too obvious a lot of the time as well.
And you guess it before the time. Exactly. This was not like that. This totally had me. Like I genuinely thought this was 4 little separate stories, and they were just totally separate. But by the end up, I think that they very cleverly come together to tell a wider, bigger, broader story in a very elegant way in the end. Do you know what I mean? Like, they don't, like, you've already sort of figured out what's happening by the end up, so they don't also labour the point as well. Like,
exactly.
Okay, so here's all the things they missed. Like, they also trust you to get it as well, which I always like in a game, you know, or in any media.
A bit of trust in the audience. Absolutely. I mean, I think that kind of covers most of the kind of story side of it. I thought it was impressively done. I did wonder a wee bit like why they made the choices around the kind of horror elements for the first 3 sequences, and that there's some sort of, there's like robots or potentially kind of aliens being hinted at, but none of that kind of plays into the final part. But it was, I guess, you know, you were essentially seeing someone's kind of fragmented, damaged vision of what has happened to him over the past however long. So yeah, I guess they were just given horror elements to kind of hint towards that. But that was one kind of maybe negative I had for the game, is that it wasn't scary at all, really. I'm not even sure it was necessarily trying to be, and maybe it's just that I find it quite hard to be scared by largely text-based stuff, you know? But
yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think it's creepy. I think
it's got atmosphere in spades.
It has a great atmosphere about it. Yeah, do I think it's scary? No, but as you rightly said, I don't really think the game's trying to be scary, so I don't think that's a negative, because I don't think that's what it's trying to accomplish. I think that we assumed that it was going to be scary because, as you said, the guy who started the studio has a background in horror, and the game after this is, I think, a bit more horror-y than this one is. So I think that we sort of inflicted that on the game, but I don't really think that's what the game was trying to accomplish.
To an extent, but part of the reason I bring it up is that the game kind of carries that label, you know what I mean? On its Wikipedia page, it's an episodic horror adventure, and it's like on the box cover, it talks about nightmares and stuff like that.
Fair enough.
But you know, but I think that is, I suspect what we're going to see in Observation as well is that what they do is sort of psychological horror and atmospheric horror and nods to horror rather than actually trying to scare you. It's like a horror context rather than like a horror experience, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I get that, and to be honest with you, vastly prefer that to
me too. Like that's
horror and cheap jump scares and all that bullshit, you know.
To kind of roll right back to the start of the show when we talked again about kind of mental fortitude, there's definitely, if this game had loads of jump scares or had kind of dodgy combat with alien monsters or something, I would have been less likely to enjoy playing it, or less willing to kind of pick it up at certain points, whereas this actually was a really easy game to play because you're just reading and kind of digesting the story by and large. I actually really liked the additions in the second and third episodes, you know, the playing with all the machines that you had in the second episode that were kind of doing what turned out to be surgery essentially, but at first a sort of scientific experiment, and you could like change the radio waves on this one and boost the signal on this one and then see what the result was. It would have been more fun in a way if you weren't so instruction led in those two sections, because in the one with the radio frequencies and you try to get certain codes or whatever in the third episode, it kind of told you like, okay, go to this thing and read it and then just plug that back in, whereas it might have been quite fun to be a bit more adventurous with that. But again, they are trying to tell a story quickly, so you can't really have that.
No, and I get you there. Like, as you said, everything, apart from the first one, I suppose, which is a bit more of an exploration, but the other two certainly are very instruction heavy. It's like, do this thing, work out this thing, go here, find that, plug it all into the computer, and away you go, or whatever, you know what I mean? I didn't have a problem with it, to be honest with you. Like, I think that, yeah, maybe if this game wasn't the debut game, they had a bigger budget and they could have afforded to do more things with it, then yeah, fair enough. But yeah, I didn't have a problem with any of that. I think that it done very well with what it was trying to do. It didn't try to do too much.
No,
do you know what I mean?
And nothing
like,
overstayed its welcome because of that.
Nothing overstayed its welcome, again, because it was episodic. In fact, in the third one, where you had to get up and physically go somewhere else and like control your character in the third person, and there was a bit of that in the fourth episode as well, by far the weakest moments of the game, because it was like,
yeah.
oh, this feels weird and floaty, and I was like, that's because they've not had time to deal with this. Do you know what I mean? That's
not
because
the focus
they were
as
making a
studio
text adventure and they've shoehorned in this first person. But do you know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, that really doesn't detract from enjoying
it's
the
about a
game
minute
at all,
long
because it is, it's really not long. But I was like, oh, I'm glad there wasn't more of this. Do you know what I mean? That's my takeaway from those sections. You know?
That section was actually really good for building atmosphere as well. But it just doesn't really add very much more to the game. And in some ways, if they just made a text adventure, that would have been fine, but there was enough wee additions throughout that kind of elevated it, I thought. Overall, to kind of wrap up, I mean, this was a short game. I'm really excited to see how they evolve as a studio for Observation when we kind of play that and talk about it in a few weeks. And I've seen a bit of that game, played a wee bit of it before, and kind of know that the atmosphere side of things that they've really built here is there. You know what I mean? That is something that they are really strong at. It would just be interesting to see where they go with a completely different sort of gameplay style and mechanic. You know, it's not a text adventure, and this is through and through. You know, so that's the kind of stuff I'm excited to see with Observation. But I don't know. I hope Observation is better, but that is not to say that I didn't really enjoy this, because I did. I think I probably enjoyed it very slightly less than you, but not by any great shakes.
No. I think it was great at what it was trying to do. Its scope was small, and Observations is marginally bigger. I mean, it's still an indie-sized game, but this was like a very short game in reality, you know? So I'm excited to see what they do with a more expanded scope. I think that what they were doing in terms of their atmosphere and the just general vibe of what they were trying to do, this sort of creepy psychological horror type thing that we were talking about, is great. Like, I think that is the sort of horror that I sort of enjoy, and that I think is really good in storytelling, and particularly in video games, I think can work really, really well. To hear that they're doing that in Observation, absolutely fantastic as far as I'm concerned. Very excited to play that as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really, really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while we're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And if you've already done that for us, you're an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Observation, as if you haven't guessed that already by the fact that we just talked about it at length. But we will be playing that in the new year when it comes round. Very excited to play it. Since playing Stories Untold, I've just been more and more excited to play Observation, to be completely honest with you. This does very much feel like a stepping stone to getting there, do you know what I mean? I mean, self-inflicted on us, obviously, but that is the end goal here. Like, I was very excited to play Observation, and it just felt as though, we should tie this in as well, and we can make that like a 2-month play-along game thing about no code in Glasgow, which is great. And I'm very glad to see that where me and Lewis are from, great video games are getting made here as well, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it, as I was saying before. It's probably going to be the next thing I boot up, actually, and play it over the next few days before Christmas, if I find any time between shopping and panicking.
Yeah, same. All right, ladies and gentlemen, a Merry Christmas, and we will see you in the new year.
Thanks.